I want you to think for just a second about a decision you instantly regretted. Maybe you sent a really important email to the exact wrong person or took a wrong turn that added a whole hour to your commute. We've all been there, right? Usually it just ruins your afternoon. But throughout history, certain bad choices didn't just ruin a day. They literally destroyed mighty empires, wiped out millions of lives, and changed the entire trajectory of human civilization forever.
So let's dive right into this. As we go through these together, we're going to explore moments where simple arrogance, unbelievable ignorance, and pure stubbornness led to the absolute worst choices imaginable. And these aren't just minor miscalculations, okay? They are monumental historical blunders. So keep that familiar feeling of instant regret in the back of your mind as we look at how a single bad call created ripples that we are quite literally still feeling today.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. Greed that destroyed empires, and how wanting more cost them absolutely everything.
So how exactly does everyday greed topple an entire empire? Well, think about the year 376 AD. A massive refugee crisis hit Rome. On paper, Emperor Valens had what seemed like a brilliant plan to integrate 200,000 Visigoths. But his fatal decision was leaving them in the hands of two completely corrupt commanders, Lupicinus and Maximus. Instead of feeding the refugees, these officials hoarded the supplies. They literally forced starving people to trade their own children for rotten dog meat. That pure, unchecked greed sparked a massive revolt that ended with the emperor dead on the battlefield, and the Western Roman Empire fundamentally shattered.
Jumping forward to 1218 AD, we see this kind of greed build even further. I want you to focus on the number 500. That's the exact amount of camels packed with gold, silk, and precious gems that Genghis Khan sent to the Khwarezmian Empire. Now, get this. He actually didn't want to invade. He just wanted a peace and trade treaty. But a local governor's greed took over. He decided to seize the entire caravan and execute the merchants.
Even then, Genghis Khan gave them one last chance. He sent 3 ambassadors directly to Shah Muhammad to demand justice. This was the Shah's golden opportunity to fix a local governor's massive mistake. But astonishingly, he chose to behead the chief diplomat and humiliate the others. And in Mongol culture, betraying and killing ambassadors was considered the absolute ultimate sin. The resulting retaliation? 100,000 fierce Mongol horsemen completely eradicated the Khwarezmian Empire, burning its cities to the ground and permanently altering the history of the Middle East.
Moving right along to Section 2, blind arrogance and hubris. Basically, what happens when overconfidence meets brutal reality.
If greed doesn't get you, ego absolutely will. Think about the sheer absurdity of the Fourth Crusade. Back in 1198, the sacred, stated goal was to liberate Jerusalem. But because the Crusaders couldn't pay their 85,000 silver mark debt to Venice for their fleet, they got completely distracted by a desperate exiled Byzantine prince. When he couldn't pay them either, they made a mind-boggling pivot. Instead of heading to Jerusalem, they brutally sacked Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world at the time. They never even made it to their original destination, but they sure managed to permanently fracture the Byzantine Empire.
And speaking of arrogance, let's talk about how an opponent's strategy can turn your own hubris into absolute ruin. In 1812, Napoleon marched a whopping 600,000 men into Russia, entirely convinced they'd just surrender in a matter of weeks. But he completely underestimated the Russian resolve to use scorched earth, meaning they burned their own crops and poisoned their own wells to starve the invaders. By the time his famished army reached a burning, abandoned Moscow, his ego had cost him everything. The brutal -30-degree Russian winter finished them off, leaving barely 100,000 survivors and totally destroying his grand reputation.
That brings us to Section 3, the ultimate butterfly effect. One small error, global consequences.
We all know the concept of the butterfly effect, right? But let's map out this real-life timeline from June 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand miraculously survives a morning grenade attack. Obviously, his route is changed for safety, but someone forgets to tell the driver. At 10:50 a.m., the driver makes a fatal wrong turn. When he's told to reverse, he hits the brakes and the open-top car stalls. The astronomical odds here are just terrifying. He stalled directly in front of Schiller's Delicatessen. And who just happened to be standing there? Gavrilo Princip, an assassin who had literally given up on the plot and was just eating a sandwich. 2 shots changed the world forever. And this brilliantly illustrates the horrific chain reaction of that one missed GPS-style instruction. Those 2 gunshots toppled domino after domino. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia,
Russia mobilizes, Germany and Britain join the fray. Over 20 million people died, 4 major empires completely collapsed, and the stage was perfectly, tragically set for World War II. All because of a wrong turn.
Let's dive into Section 4, Disastrous Planning and Policy, or when bad ideas become government mandates.
Because disasters aren't just made on battlefields, you know? They happen in government offices too. In 1958, Chairman Mao launched the Great Sparrow Campaign, based on some incredibly flawed math. Kill the sparrows, save the grain. The whole country mobilized, banging pots and pans until 1 to 2 billion sparrows literally dropped dead from pure exhaustion. But they completely forgot elementary biology. Sparrows eat locusts. This bizarre war against nature unleashed an absolute insect plague that devoured the crops and starved tens of millions of people to death.
Pivoting to 1947, let's focus on a shockingly low number: 36. That is the exact amount of days the British government gave a man named Sir Cyril Radcliffe to draw the border dividing the entire Indian subcontinent into India and Pakistan.
Keep in mind, Radcliffe had never even been to India. He knew absolutely nothing about the culture. Armed with outdated maps, he drew pencil lines that blindly sliced through ancient communities, farmlands, and even individual homes. And to make it infinitely worse, the lines were kept secret until 2 days after independence. People literally woke up in the quote-unquote wrong country. This hopelessly rushed ignorance caused absolute panic, the displacement of 15 million people, and up to 2 million deaths in the ensuing chaos.
Now for our final section, Section 5, Ignoring the Obvious Warnings or Racing Past the Red Flags.
This brings us to modern catastrophes, where leaders stared at glaring red flags and just hit the accelerator anyway. Let's walk step by step through Chernobyl in April 1986. A so-called safety test is handed to a totally unprepared night crew. The deputy chief engineer actually orders the emergency systems completely disabled. Then, when the power plunges, they totally ignore the shutdown rulebook. To force the power back up, they pulled out almost all the control rods. It's literally like speeding downhill in a massive truck with absolutely no brakes.
And right here is where the fatal design flaw kicks in. At 1:23 a.m., a panicked operator hits the emergency stop. But because the control rod tips were made of graphite, inserting them actually caused a massive, deadly power surge instead of stopping it. That single, arrogant test caused a catastrophic thermal explosion that cost the Soviet Union $235 billion, caused thousands of deaths, and left behind a radioactive ghost town.
Now let's shift gears to the ultimate corporate blunder. Back in the year 2000, Blockbuster was absolute king, pulling in $800 million a year just in late fees alone. Meanwhile, Netflix was just a broke DVD by mail startup. Netflix's CEO walks into Blockbuster's boardroom and literally offers the whole company to them for a mere $50 million. The Blockbuster executives laughed them out of the room. They thought it was a joke, completely blind to the shifting tides of technology.
Consider the stark financial contrast today. Because Blockbuster stubbornly refused to adapt, they went completely bankrupt. I mean, there's literally one nostalgic store left on Earth right now. Netflix, on the other hand, pivoted to streaming, totally revolutionized global entertainment, and is now valued at over $250 billion. Blockbuster could have owned the whole shebang, but they just couldn't see past their own ego.
Tying all of this together, it's fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying to see the pattern here. It doesn't matter if you're a Roman emperor, a British lawyer, a Soviet engineer, or a corporate CEO. The common thread architecting these disasters is always arrogance, short-sightedness, and an absolute refusal to listen to the warnings right in front of you.
Please like and subscribe.